Thank you all for joining. And you are in the session Accelerating Financial Inclusion for Refugees. My name is Tariro, Nyimo, and I am a Deputy Divisional Director for Digital Frontiers Institute. That is the school that delivers the programs. And my job here is to introduce our sponsor and moderator, William Derban. Now, William is a renowned financial inclusion and international development expert and is the Global Director, Digital Financial Services at Opportunity International, which is the sponsor of the inclusive digital finance stream within Pathway to 17 Summit. So, William, welcome and over to you.
Thank you very much, Tariro. Thank you very much, Tariro. Thanks for your kind introduction. So good morning, good afternoon, good evening for all of you who have joined us here today. In many ways, you can imagine living one's normal life, everything that you know and love, and moving into another country or community. Now, that can be one of the toughest things that can happen to a person. One can easily become excluded, not only socially, but also financially. And if you've ever visited a refugee camp or displaced settlement, you will understand the pain and the many challenges that they go through. But you also see resilience, dignity, and hope. Today, we are going to have a conversation on accelerated financial inclusion for refugees. We will explore the roles of digital financial services and how it can and it is transforming the lives of refugees. I have with me Tamsin Scurfield, who is the Business Development and Partnership Manager for Opportunity International UK based in Uganda. Welcome, Tamsin. And Matthew Downer, who is the Senior Manager, Research and Policy for the Mobile for Humanitarian Innovation Program, the GSMA, based in London. I've had the pleasure of working with both of them. So believe me when I say we are really fortunate and appreciative to have such experts on the panel. So welcome, Tamsin. Welcome, Matthew. So I'll pass it on to Matthew to kick us off. So Matthew, can you share with us some insights from your extensive research on digital financial inclusion for refugees, discussing some of the key challenges that they face? Thank you.
Sure, thank you very much. If we're able to share the couple of slides that we have for this scene setting, that would be great. And first of all, thank you very much for having me to talk about this important topic, and a quick framer for people who don't know who we are at the GSMA, to say that our experience and expertise is very much around financial inclusion driven by mobile financial services, specifically mobile money. And so that's where a lot of our conversation today will dwell from the GSMA side. If we can jump to the next slide, please. So in the last number of years, we've done various pieces of research with various displaced communities and various partners. And what we've seen time again is that refugees often have high levels and growing levels of phone ownership, often smart or feature phones, so internet enabled. And actually you see here three very different settings, all of which where more than 80% of the individuals we spoke to had a mobile phone. This presents a really strong opportunity for using digital financial services and mobile financial services to lead to financial inclusion for these groups, obviously always being cognizant of the challenges and risks that come with digitalization. If you jump to the next slide, please. But what do we mean by digital financial inclusion? And I think this is a really important place to kind of start the conversation. At the GSMA, we don't think about financial inclusion as a goal to itself, but more thinking about what does it enable. Financial inclusion is important and digital financial inclusion important because it provides access to essential products and services, many of which can be vital in times of crisis or for people who have been displaced. And with this in mind, it's super important right now to remember that refugees and displaced people are absolutely not a homogenous group, and that we need to think about them as a range of individuals with different needs, with different goals, with different financial realities and different amounts of money and income, and consider what these financial services mean for them. Effective digital financial services and financial inclusion can lead to resilience and recovery for groups in different ways, but it can be different. So we've seen refugees in Uganda, for example, who actually need access to financial services to reach saving products. But at the same time, recent research that we've done has shown that actually internally displaced people in South Sudan and refugees in Papua New Guinea simply needed a digital financial service which would help them receive emergency cash over long distances. And that was the most pressing financial need. And so acknowledging this when we're talking about this today is vital to understand that there is a variety of products for a variety of individuals. But it's not always easy. Next slide, please. Our research and our engagement on this topic has identified a range of barriers that refugees face to being digitally financially included. Almost all of these also impact non-displaced groups, but often it's important to think about the nuances that are faced by refugees. So quickly, I'll run through. So we talk about access to networks, both the physical connectivity and the agents that are vital and the backbone to digital financial services. If you're a refugee in a rural camp setting, often these are less developed or harder to reach than it might be in urban settings. It's important to have both financial digital literacy as well as broader literacy, and often refugees are excluded from national campaigns that drive this or don't have access to the same level of educations. Relevance. We know that it's important for customers to see a relevance, to see a product that suits for them. And we don't always see FSPs designing or developing products which specifically meet the needs of these consumer segments. Regulation is vital. So identity documents, KYC legislation, we often see refugees excluded either by accident or specifically from accessing SIM cards in their own name or meeting KYC requirements, which often excludes them from registering in their own name in the first place. And lastly, money. Without money, there's no point in having a financial service. And often we see that refugees are excluded from rights to work or rights to run businesses. And whilst we acknowledge that things like cash and voucher assistance and humanitarian cash transfers can start and open the door to digital financial inclusion, without regular or predictable incomes, often it's difficult for these services to be relevant to people. And on those last two, I guess it's really important to say that they have real regulatory requirements which we probably won't spend too much time on today, but for those who are interested in the policy perspective, there are two documents that I would call out that people should look at. So recently, the Alliance for Financial Inclusion published a policy framework on how to reach financial inclusion for refugees as a regulator. And UNHCR, the UN Commission for Refugees, publishes a series called Displaced and Disconnected, which looks at regulatory frameworks around access to SIM cards and access to mobile money for refugees, which are across lots of contexts, as well as a guide to do it yourself. So if you're interested in the kind of policy place, I'd start there. Yes, so that's us from a quick framer perspective. Will, I hope that is useful to kick us off.
No, thank you very much, Matthew. That's really useful. I mean, I really do like the idea of, basing some of these solutions in the challenges that people provide, and also the fact that financial inclusion is not an end to itself, and that, when we have digital financial solutions, we shouldn't sort of develop them for the sake of developing technology, and the relevance and the trust issues, I think for me are really key, and they're coming out quite strong here. I want to spend more time on the questions. A lot of questions are coming here. So I'll just jump to Tamsin, and then we can have some more time to discuss. So Tamsin, I know you're based in Uganda. I know you've spent lots of time in the refugee camps in Uganda, but also across Africa. Matthew has said, that the people in the refugee camp are not homogeneous, and that's actually something quite powerful. Sometimes we just assume that people in the refugee camp are all the same, and we try and find solutions that just fit them as refugees. So it would be useful from your experience if you could just walk us through the life of refugees, highlighting some of their needs and some of their challenges. Over to you. Yeah.
Okay, thanks, William. And that's a pretty big question because as we all know, refugees are not one homogeneous group. So I wanted to go deeper into a couple of refugee personas that will give a sense of who are these people that we're talking about. Before I do that, just to really build on what Matthew has said, when Opportunity entered this space in Uganda in 2019, and also Colombia, where we currently work, we really wanted to understand, was there even a viable market segment in this space? Were refugees financially viable? And were we able to design products that could meet both their needs, but also our microfinance institutions as well? And so what we did was we used a human-centered design approach to really go into the settlements, to talk to some of the refugees themselves, and to be able to understand the different types of financial behaviors and livelihood opportunities that they had. So if we go to the first slide, we developed a series of personas to capture some of the information that we got. And here we're going to meet a guy called Safari. Safari is a border driver. For those of you that don't know, borders are taxi motorbike, motorbikes that taxi people around. They're very common in Uganda, in parts of Kenya, in Rwanda as well, I'm sure in other places. So he's been living in a settlement for around 7 years. He has a family with 4 children, and he drives a border for his daily income. And I think, just to say from a personal perspective, when I first went into one of the refugee settlements, Naka Valley in Uganda, I was surprised by how many borders, how much business opportunities I could see there. So Safari's daily earnings are around, in shillings, 20 to 50,000 shillings. That's around 7 to around 12 US dollars a day. He's semi-illiterate. His goals are to invest in a new business, and he wants to buy a border. Ultimately, he wants to buy a house. And his needs are primarily to educate his children. Okay, so that's one of our target groups. If we move to the next slide, we can meet a lady called Sarah. Sarah is a member of a savings group. She's been living in the settlement for 12 years. She's a community mobilizer and a member of a women's association. She speaks Kiswahili French. Her average monthly earnings are only around 100,000 shillings, so about $30 a month. She's also literate, and her goals are to expand her business, to support her family, and her needs are really to grow her business and to educate her children. So all of that to say, if you go to the final slide here, you'll see we have a client segmentation strategy that we implemented inside the refugee space to really help us to understand who these refugees are. And Safari and Sarah both fall very much into the subsistence segment. So they have been actively working, but they are would still benefit from kind of group loans, from financial literacy, from business skills training. They are not dependent, unlike many of the refugees we can imagine who are in the dependent section and fully reliant on humanitarian aid, but they're not fully resilient either. They don't yet have a well-functioning income, and they still have a way to go to meet their needs. That's a brief snapshot. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tamsin. I love the persona work because it allows us to zoom in and really try and focus on the customers that we have. Now, I just want to switch our meter band and start looking at some of the solutions. So I'll come back to you, Matthew, if you don't mind. I know that the GSMA has done quite a lot of work to demonstrate how mobile technology specifically, but also digital technology more broadly, it can impact the lives of refugees. Can you share with us some of the exciting examples that you have?
Sure, thank you very much. And I guess, again, just a quick preface, the GSMA, we don't implement, we're a thought partner and a supporter. And so all of the examples today are done through exciting partnerships with other organizations. So we can't take all the credit for anything that we talk about. One of the key areas, I guess, a challenge, and I kind of framing some of my solutions around the challenges we discussed earlier. One of the key challenges we've seen in camp-based refugees accessing financial inclusion is access to agents, both enough of them and agents that are sensitive to their needs. And so 2 exciting projects that we've done. We've supported the Grameen Foundation in Uganda, where in some of the settlements in the northwest of the country, looking at what are the supports systems that can be put in place to grow the agent networks there, focusing specifically on growing growing the number of women and young youth agents, acknowledging there was a gap there. And so interesting there to look at business skills training, partnership with MTN to reduce the initial capital requirements, and also galvanizing these new agents to go on to provide digital financial literacy training in their communities, acknowledging that kind of knowledge and skills and comfort with solutions is a major barrier. So thinking about ways in which interventions can address multiple barriers. And I guess moving to Rwanda, we partnered with Alight and MTN there to roll out agent training. So we trained nearly 1,000 agents who were serving customers in the refugee camps in Rwanda on humanitarian code of conduct training, how to flag protection issues, and how to deliver services in an inclusive manner, kind of addressing concerns that humanitarians had that sometimes the agents weren't totally sensitive to the needs and the situations of refugee customers. And so interesting industry-led responses there. And another piece of work that we've done in a few markets, often in partnership with UN colleagues and our industry members, is coalescing advocacy coalitions to engage with local regulators and local policymakers to talk about issues around identity and right to work, to ensure that refugees can exist within an enabling regulatory environment to help them have access. And we've seen some really positive outcomes. I mean, no one is surprised that in Uganda, the government is incredibly welcoming of refugees. And a few years ago, after consultation with industry, issued a statement saying that they could actually use attestation, so that the certificates they get on arrival to register for SIM cards and mobile money. So really, and at that point, we estimated that 600,000 refugees overnight had access to services in their own name for the first time. So some really exciting ways in which kind of coalitions and conversations with policymakers can have some substantial outcomes.
No, thank you very much. I mean, I like the agent approach and the last mile, because that's always a very key thing about reaching not only refugees, but people at the bottom of the pyramid. Tamsin, you work for a network of banks. So maybe you can give us some solutions that you have been working on refugees.
Yeah. Thanks, William. And I have to give a shout out to GSMA, because the attestation was a real game changer in Uganda. One of our partners, it was taken between 2 to 3 months to verify their identification with OPM and UNHCR, because they weren't using attestation. And it was a very long, drawn out manual process. And you can imagine, if you're a client looking to open an account, trying to be encouraged to get financially included, that a 2 or 3 months wait simply isn't viable. So that was a real game changer for us here in Uganda when the attestation came along board. So yeah, if you think about what are we doing here, we go back to our personas. We talked about this guy Safari, who's a border driver. So one of the things that we can know is that he will benefit from a longer term loan. The money that he makes on a daily basis and a weekly basis is not going to be enough to pay back the loan in 12 months. So we were able to structure a specific border loan over a 2-year period, whereby border drivers were able to make regular weekly and or monthly payments. Because this is a digital webinar, I need to also make a shout out to the idea, and we haven't yet done this, but it's something that we're working on, our partners, to be able to actually use his phone to make deposits and directly pay off his loan in the field where he is. So by this way, serving him where he is and allowing him at his point of business to be able to regularly both see his account, but also make payments. If we go to Sarah, she's a member of the savings group. The savings group, they deposit about $1 a week, the members, but currently the box that they hold, it has over 5 million Ugandan shillings, which is about $1,300. Her main concern is safety and security for that box. If anything happens to the box, the entire members of the group savings are lost. So groups like that are able to benefit from opening a bank account, putting the money safely in there, and our partners have developed VSLA savings products that reflect both the same method and means of usage as a traditional VSLA group. And finally, because this is a digital webinar again, just to say that one of our partners has recently developed a light KYC digital wallet. What this means is that refugees are able to open accounts with limited functionality, but sufficient functionality, I can get to that, using just their first name, their last name, their date of birth, and any form of identification. And this wallet becomes a digital wallet from which they're able to both receive money from an NGO, from WFP, but also push money out. For refugees that do not have a phone, some do, some don't, they're able to use their fingerprint as a unique identifier at a local agent point. This enables refugees to receive money, of course, and it also encourages people, we've seen it encourages people to save the money they get and not spend it down immediately. So in this way, starting to think about having that savings culture and putting a very small amount of money aside if and when they need. Yeah, that's just a small snapshot. Thanks, William.
No, thank you very much, Tamsin. That's really useful. And I would explore a little bit of that soon. But there's a question here from Sawari. And he says, or what he says, I'm not sure, he says, to bring in the refugees under the umbrella of financial inclusion, we need to provide them with digital identities first. Won't it be a matter of tension for the host country that the refugees might misuse it? So I'll get all of you to react to it. So probably Tamsin first and then Matthew. But it's a whole issue about the host community, you know, and the refugee community.
I mean, I'd like to understand what tension that they're referring to. From my understanding, refugees and host communities all need to and will benefit from some form of digital identity. If it's a identification card, in Uganda recently, William, you recall VSLA groups have just been asked and requested by governments to register with the government. And we are talking internally about if we can digitalize that process to help facilitate it and make it easier for these groups. So I guess I need to understand a little bit more. What are the tensions that he means? In my understanding, both groups would need to have that type of identity.
Yeah, and I guess I had a similar response to this question. I guess fundamentally, from a rights-based perspective, everyone should have the right to be able to prove they are who they say they are, and that should across both refugees and host community members. And I think often in many countries, and again, not to be so Uganda specific, we know in Uganda that the government requires you to also work with host communities when working with refugees. That's part of the policy frameworks. You would hope that they aren't in a worse situation. But I think this question around misuse, again, would be interesting to understand, because from a financial inclusion, from an opening accounts perspective, the need for identity is really around anti-money laundering and counter financial terrorism. And actually, I don't see where there is a misuse if you have a functioning and foundational identity which allows you to open a wallet. I don't personally see the avenue for misuse. And it doesn't necessarily have to be a digital identity either. A well-regarded system such as a national identity card, which can be a physical identity, still is sufficient for opening many wallets in many countries. So I think there's a few parts of it which I might not necessarily agree with.
Hello, I think I lost Matthew. I lost you a bit. Okay, right. Yeah, I think the tension that he might be talking about, you know, in some of the communities, if you give them identity, if you give somebody an identity, then it means that the person has certain rights within that country, you know, and sometimes that's where that tension could be. And we've seen them in more politically, you know, charged countries. In Uganda, maybe not. But in some countries, the fact that you give somebody an ID means that they can have access to certain services from the country. And that's when the host community might feel that, well, you know, you are not so deserving. So that's where that tension can be. And we've seen them in some communities where they just won't give them the IDs, you know, because once you give the person the ID, then the person is, you know, can access services. So I want to assume that those are the sort of tensions that he's talking about.
I guess in those situations, I guess very quickly, that's a kind of cohesion and relationships with the host community is a political issue, and I think above conversations around financial inclusion, I would probably say.
Yeah, no, I agree with you, but I think it's an important principle there that when we go out there, we've got to look at the host community as well, because most often they are also in the same sort of area. They've given up their land. So when we are providing digital financial services to the community, we have to make sure that I would say that the host community benefits as well as the refugee community benefits. We can't just go to the refugee community, give them all this fancy stuff, and forget about the host community. So I think that's the principle there. But I just wanted to also touch on another issue around infrastructure. So Matthew, you did mention that about 80% of them have got at least a basic phone. You know, what can you say about the usage? You know, how they actually use the phone. How ready are they for digital financial services?
Oh, I mean, that question is far bigger than the time we have left, I guess, to go back to the earlier points around refugees by far not being homogenous, and even within each settlement, I use 3 examples where it's 80%. There are others where it's less. I think it's impossible to answer that question unless we hone in on certain places. And I think with any segment, you're looking at financial inclusion, not of displaced people, but amongst communities who are yet to reach kind of high levels of inclusion. There are pockets, be it around education, be it around finance, be it around trust, that have different degrees of readiness, right? And so, sorry to kind of fluff it a bit, but I think that's a hard one to say. But I guess what we have largely seen in the past is that refugees tend to be similarly digitally included and digitally ready as the communities in which they live. And so it's more about understanding the local context than it is around what is a quote unquote refugee's position as a specific thing.
Yeah, and maybe just to add on to what Matthew was saying as well. I think, you know, he's right. We have refugees from all sorts of backgrounds and walks of life, but I think the main challenge, particularly in some of these refugee settlements, is around infrastructure to even access mobile network. I mean, if I'm going to the settlement myself personally, you know, to make work calls, to have work meetings, access to even like basic network, let alone internet, is challenging. So when we're talking about digital financial inclusion, and this is always comes up as a topic, we have to be able to work with the MNOs. We have to be able to identify that there is a business case. I know GSMA has done some work in this to be able to encourage MNOs into the space, because they want to do it from a social mission, but they're also there to make money. And so and it costs a lot to set those types of things up. So just to be mindful of that. And similarly with agents as well, there has to be a viable business case for agents to be able to even have sufficient liquidity to be able to then offer the types of services that we as financial institutions would wish for refugees to access. So it's a complicated space.
Yeah, we just had a comment from Sangani from Zambia, and she's saying that it seems like in Zambia they also have a certificate for refugees, which goes through the central bank and also recognized for attestation. So I think the idea for ID and using attestations, good thanks to the good work in Uganda, seems to be spreading, and I think it becomes a very key point. I know we have about a minute or so to go. I don't know whether Tamsin, Matthew, you have one last word from yourselves, comments from yourself before I conclude.
I mean, it's a journey. You know, when I first started working in this space 3-4 years ago, I thought it was far-fetched. I wasn't sure that it would be viable, and it definitely is. At the same time, these issues around attestation, around KYC, around digital infrastructure, about growing local markets and economies will take time. So it's a journey. We're walking it. We're seeing the results, and there's a huge potential for scale and impact as we progress. Thank you, William.
Thank you.
And not to repeat, I think Tamsin said a lot of it very well, and there are a lot of challenges that you need to focus on. I guess for us, it's the main thing to say that never assume that you know what's best for people or what they need. We do this research around access to and use of digital technology all the time, multiple times a year, and every study is surprising, and every study brings up new considerations. So I think if you are entering this space for the first time, or even you've been in it for a while, but you've not taken the time to ask people what they want and what they need, that's really what I would say. Everything needs to be grounded in a real good understanding of what people as individuals, as opposed to the collective as refugees, are needing from financial services.
Oh, thank you very much, Matthew and Tamsin. You know, in the late 90s, the effect of the civil war in Liberia and Sierra Leone has spread to Ghana, where I was a student then. And I met a young student. He was in his third year in the university in Liberia, and he literally had to just walk out of his university. When he went downstairs, the soldier took his shirts. He went around the block, another soldier took his shoes. And long story short, escaping death several times, he ended up in a cry, and he was doing odd jobs in the street. You know, and I don't think that 30 minutes, Tariro, is enough to discuss and understand, you know, what a refugee goes through. You know, I don't know where that young man is today, but it's not just about us. We are trying to provide services to them, but as we've heard here, understanding the persona, understanding the person's mindset and what the person is going through is important if we are going to try and provide services to them, and especially digital financial services to them. So I hope that we all go away today understanding a little bit more about the challenges that refugees face, but more importantly, the solutions that the GSM and also Opportunity International are providing. And I would encourage that we continue the conversation. We continue talking about these issues, continue engaging with refugees and providing the solutions that can help them improve their life, give them hope, and restore their dignity. So thank you very much for spending the time to speak for us, giving us the opportunity to share our thoughts on this issue, and we wish you all the best. Thank you very much. Back to you, Tariro.
Well, thank you, William. I think there's very little I can add to those discussions. Just to reiterate, thank you to the panelists, Matthew from GSMA and Tamsin from Opportunity International. And just to say, there are a lot of key takeaways, but mine really is to understand if there really is a business case for refugees in order to get more people involved in serving them, and so that they can also be part of the digital financial system or financial ecosystem as a whole. But thank you so much for having this session on Pathway to 17 Summit, the second one for this year, 2022. All I can say is goodbye and thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks,
Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.